Hello, I'm joined by Frank and Chris of Graham and Borgese Law Firm, Debt Relief Made Easy. And now they're going to share more information about their different practice areas and how clients can understand more about what they do. Gentlemen, I'd like to ask you a little bit about judgments. What exactly is a judgment, and help us understand how that affects people related to consumer debt.
Well, a judgment is something that a creditor obtains when they take you to court and the court sides with them. And it's a very powerful thing that creditors try to obtain because it allows them to try and collect on the debt even without your own will. So that means they can try to garnish your wages, freeze your bank account, or put liens on your property, which significantly restricts what you can do with that property.
Because now they have a court order that says the creditor has a right to collect on that debt.
Exactly. I mean, before the judgment's entered, most people deal with collection calls or letters, and it can be something that can be brushed aside. But once that judgment's in place, it allows the creditor to force the issue.
And when this rolls out, what are some of the different judgments? Does this involve perhaps wage garnishments or liens on property? How does it affect me as a consumer?
Well, generally speaking, wage garnishments is one of the points where people generally reach out to us, because for many years or for months they were able to kind of ignore the issue. But as soon as their employer gets something from the sheriff saying that their wages are going to be garnished, or they get a notice from the sheriff, that's where they're like, okay, this is serious, I have to take care of this. The same with a frozen bank account. As soon as somebody goes to the bank and tries to take out money, or goes to the gas station and tries to purchase gas and their card's declined and they know they have money in there, that's generally a point where they would call us, because again, that's something that kind of gets their attention and brings us to like a priority in their life. And finally, with liens on real property, that's another place we see it a lot. When somebody goes to refinance their home or buy or sell a house and they're unable to because the bank or title company won't let them, then again, that's something where they really, this becomes like an emergency situation almost, where they need to, address the judgment.
Because now it's affecting your ability to do other things in other areas of your life. And what you're suggesting is sometimes people aren't aware of the judgment until their wages have been garnished, or until they do another activity that puts it on the radar screen.
Absolutely. I mean, that's a large segment of our practice, is people discover the existence of the judgment because they receive a notice from the sheriff, or because they go to sell their property and there's a lien, or as Chris mentioned, they go to make a purchase, whether at the grocery store or the gas station, and now their card is being declined. And what we do at that point is we help them investigate what transpired, and it's a very complicated scenario and involves motion practice, but depending on the factors, we can oftentimes get the judgment vacated, which means to have it erased, and that stops all of the effects and enforcement measures that come along with that judgment.
And so it stops the floodgates, stops the damage from getting worse at that point.
Absolutely.
Interesting. You also deal sometimes with student loan defaults, right? That's another category of this. What typically is happening there?
Well, student loan debt is a tremendous problem today across the country. And as everybody knows, there's different types of student loans, private and federal. Depending on what kind of loan you're dealing with, there's different options for trying to resolve that debt. Many times we see lawsuits by creditors, and we defend those, as well as the enforcement measures that a student loan company may have. But additionally, there may be a federal loan that is being administratively enforced, and there's different programs that somebody can utilize to try and stop those enforcement measures.
Like rehabilitation, consolidation, reasonable affordable plans, and also even sometimes forgiveness of the loan if they qualify. Many times people come to us when they are, as Frank mentioned, administratively being garnished, so they'll notice like a 15% garnishment on their paycheck. without any judgment being entered, because the government doesn't have to go through the normal course of lawsuit and judgment like a private company would. And there are ways to stop the garnishments. There are ways to get the amounts paid monthly down. It's a very, very complex and ever-changing kind of situation, because the government's always changing exactly what you're supposed to do and what they allow you to do, and so it is pretty complex.
So if you're going through this, it's best to have an advocate on your side, an experienced attorney, someone who knows the process and knows the tension points and knows how to fix them if they're possible, right?
Absolutely. I say all the time that the parties that are trying to collect the debt, that's what they do. And they're very well versed in the laws, and they're trained to try and collect every penny that they possibly can. So, as a consumer, you want to make sure that you're aware of all the options available to you, and that you have somebody that's familiar with the situation, so that they can provide you with your options and try to really not only protect your interests, but also present you with some power behind it to try and get the very best results possible.
And we've been talking about judgments, and we also talked earlier that you don't want to ignore notices or other things that are coming to you that might be making you aware of a debt issue, because do a certain amount of people get a lot of default judgments because they just ignored notices or failed to appear or failed to pay, and thus, as you mentioned, the judgment goes negatively against them, and now they've got a more serious legal issue on their hands?
Absolutely. As we all know, in sports, if one side doesn't show up, the other side wins by default, and the same principle applies in court. So if somebody's receiving notices that there's a lawsuit pending, it's extremely important at that point to protect your interest, defend the lawsuit, and then you can try to get the best results possible. But many times people are not even properly served with notice of the lawsuit, and as we mentioned, they only discover the existence of the judgment when it's being enforced against them. And imagine tomorrow that your bank account is frozen and you can't purchase groceries, or you're trying to sell a house and that lien is preventing it. All of these time limitations can become even more stressful. So that's why we urge anybody with a lawsuit or a judgment to take action right away, because the more time that passes, the worse the situation can be.
And you guys talk about helping people sleep better at night. You understand the stress that it causes, and that's exactly what you try and lessen, right?
Sure, yeah, and I think to add to what Frank was saying, with the lawsuits, a lot of times people are actually served properly, but they just don't know how to respond, so they may just call the creditor. And they might call them actually for help, which is kind of, counterintuitive. If you think about it, you're not going to call the person that's trying to sue you and collect money for you for help, but there's nobody else to call. So a lot of times they'll call them and they'll try to work something out on their own, and they may even think that they've done so, but a lot of times they go ahead and get a judgment anyway, because why not? I mean, they're totally, legally allowed to go ahead and get a judgment even if something's set up. So I think it's important for people to know how to handle a lawsuit, how to respond to a lawsuit, when they should respond, how they should respond. And that's not very clear from the summons and complaint that you receive. It's actually very unclear.
And these are normal people, your neighbors, your teacher, and they don't necessarily know how to navigate the system. So if you were coming across someone that was under financial stress, help me give them a 30-second pitch, or what would you say to that person if you came across them in the grocery store and they told you that they were having financial stress? What would your advice to them be?
I would say sit down with us, give us a few minutes to learn about your situation, and we'll take all of the procedure and analysis and we'll dissect that and break it down into simple options and explanations. Many times that can be a debilitating issue for somebody. As you mentioned, we like to discuss, let us help you sleep better tonight, because once you know that you've taken the steps and you've begun the process of resolving your debt issue, it can really alleviate a lot of that strain and stress.
I think I noticed too, a lot of people, they feel bad about it. So they're embarrassed or ashamed about it. We're very non-judgmental. This is all that we do. We work with people in this situation. We understand why people get in this situation, and that it's not necessarily something that they did wrong. It's something that, life happens, I tell people. So, I think that people should feel that if they sit down for a free consultation, that they'll know that they're not going to be judged, and that basically we'll do everything in our powers to get them back on the right track.
Thank you for all that information, gentlemen, and best of luck to you in the future.
Thank you.